and take some of the questions that have been received. And I'm going to start by asking Maritza to respond to a question from Cynthia, who asks, when will decisions be made regarding whether or not NCAA sports will go forward in the fall?
Thank you, Jen, for sharing that question. So that is a very good question that we at the national level in all three divisions are looking very closely at. I will say that the return to fall is going to be directed by what our institutions do, and the decisions probably will be made in the coming weeks. So we will have to wait on institutions to decide whether they will be doing instruction in person or instruction online, or a combination of both. And depending on how they will do their instruction, they will decide on whether they will bring students, including student athletes, to campus. Once those decisions are made, our governance groups in all three divisions will be ready to discuss possible championship format. And I will say for all three divisions, probably our number one choice would be to hold championships when they are scheduled, how they are scheduled, and where at the championship site that they're currently scheduled. That may or may not be the case. So we have internal working groups creating different possible options and scenarios in case normal does not occur. But right now we're holding tight to wait and see what our institutions are doing in the fall before making any changes to the playing and practice season for the fall. So Jen, I hope that answers your question. Feel free to add anything that I might have missed.
It was wonderful. Thank you, Maritza. Louise, the next question is for you, and it comes from Mark. For Division III, how involved are sport-specific coaches in supporting discussions with the admissions office and the financial aid office on non-athletic aid?
Hi, Jen. Great question, Mark. In Division III, we have a principle that we treat our student athletes the same way we treat all of our students on campus. Coaches are definitely involved in the admissions process, the same way faculty members are involved in the admission process for trying to attract students to come to their institution. There's always this process with recruiting that not only do you want to recruit a student to play your particular sport, but you want to make sure that there's an academic fit, is the major there that you want. As well as, the best way I can put it when I used to be a coach, is there a social fit? Are there other things on campus that you can get involved with when you're a student or student athlete on the campus? Regarding financial aid, I mentioned, and Maritza also mentioned, that we don't offer athletic scholarships. And so the interaction between coaches and our financial aid office is more on a higher level, that they want to make sure that coaches understand what is the philosophy, what are the principles for awarding financial aid. But our coaches would not be in the office of the financial aid director saying, let's negotiate what non-athletic scholarships a particular student could get. That goes directly against our rules and regulations. However, I would tell you on a Division III campus, probably it's a 2 and 1 as well, all of those experts, both in financial aid and admissions, are constantly collaborating with athletics to say, how do we, in our best way possible with our own rules, recruit students to our institutions? Thanks, Jen. Good question, Mark.
Thanks, Louise. Appreciate that. So there's been a couple of very keen participants, and I'll try to answer a couple of questions with just one response. So a few of you have noted that there was no men's basketball championship this year, and as a significant majority of the association's revenue, there are a couple of questions about how the loss of that revenue, which is real and being felt, is going to impact the future. So the short answer is, it is impacting this upcoming year. provided that there can be a men's basketball tournament in 2021, it should really be a one-year hit to the association's budget. However, institutions and conferences are experiencing a budget reduction that's going to last many years, because as an athletic department is part of a higher education institution, and it wasn't only athletics that's impacted, but higher education institutions in general are very much impacted by the current financial situation in the states. So those state institutions have state appropriations that are being impacted. Even private institutions are seeing a different funding model across the board. So, and this isn't a Division I specific issue. Division II and III institutions are also feeling it and planning accordingly. So the question that was noted here is about a prospective student athlete who has verbally committed, so has not yet signed a scholarship agreement, and the question of whether or not that scholarship would still be available. It sounds like, while this person is anonymous, it sounds like they've got a good understanding of what a verbal offer means, which means it's not binding to the institution or the individual. And so my recommendation to you all would be to contact that institution and ask specifically about what the scholarship dollars look like for those sports that your young people are interested in participating in college. Not every institution is going to reduce sport offerings. Not every institution is going to reduce scholarship dollars. Some are going to find cost savings in other areas, whether that be in staffing or the way in which they conduct their competitions. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all answer for the institutions. Really encourage you to reach out to those institutions directly to find out how those budget reductions are ultimately impacting the overall experience of prospects and planning for them to come to campus. I want to acknowledge right off the bat that some of you are asking very specific rules questions. Neither Louise, Marissa, or myself are rules experts, and so we're going to make sure that we capture these questions and hopefully can provide some information, but you don't want us responding to them. So, Louise, we've got a question from Raquel, who is asking, actually sharing that Johns Hopkins is the dream school. And how realistic is it for a Canadian athlete with excellent academics to obtain financial aid at a Division III institution?
Yeah, so it's a great question, and I'm thrilled that Johns Hopkins, it's an outstanding school. It has not only Division III athletics, but it also has some Division I programs. One of the great things about Division III is that institutional autonomy. So every Division III institution meets the needs of their student athletes in different ways. And so if that's the dream, you should go after it. And what I would say is you should reach out directly to that admissions office and that financial aid office to ask them what opportunities are available to you as a Canadian student to be able to get financial assistance to attend that institution. And again, if Johns Hopkins isn't there, there are many other Ncaa schools in all three divisions that might be a possibility. But I know that every campus is definitely willing to give that information to you to see if you can come up with a financial plan that is workable for you and your parents or your guardians to be able to afford for you to attend that particular institution. Thanks, Jen.
Thanks, Louise. I appreciate that answer. Maritza, I'm going to ask you to continue on with the response to the initial question about planning for the safe return of sports. The question is that colleges and universities are now informing students who are planning to enroll in the fall that there won't be on-campus classes in that fall term or fall quarter. And the question is specific to what happens to the winter sports like ice hockey if that's the case. Can you share a little bit about what the 3 divisions are exploring?
Yes, Jen, thank you. So the first phase of this exploration, similar to what I mentioned before, is the fall sports, because obviously fall sports should be reporting to our institutions pretty soon. There are several, as I mentioned, each of our governance groups are discussing several options, whether it is to delay our championships based on what our institutions do to return in the fall, whether it is to hold championships at a different time. One possibility is to hold championships, all championships, regardless of season next year if institutions don't come back during the fall term. But again, it's really early to make those decisions, because while some institutions in some areas of the country have started to make those decisions, that is not consistent throughout the country. So a couple of weeks ago, there was an announcement from a group of California institutions that they will not be having in-person instruction in the fall. So that's the first major announcement that we have received. But across the country, those announcements haven't been made. So as they are made, we are looking at other possibilities, including fall sports, winter sports, and spring sports. But again, a lot of those decisions will have to wait until we have a little bit more clarity of what is happening across the country. And again, one of the possibilities is whether we can, as institutions, host all 3 seasons in one compressed season or not. There are a lot of challenges with that possibility for institutions, but again, we're just at this point looking at different scenarios where we can provide meaningful opportunities. And I think the goal of all of this is to provide meaningful opportunities for our student athletes and to make sure that our student athletes participate in a health environment and a safety environment. So with those goals in mind, our governance groups will continue to track what's happening across the country to make the best decisions for our student athletes.
Thanks for that, Maritza. I really appreciate it. There was a question here that I was going to ask Louise to respond to, but it looks like maybe Elizabeth has addressed it. So let's see. There's a couple of questions about financial aid, and again, the financial aid legislation is division specific. So I'm going to speak rather generally here and know that it won't meet exactly the questions that were asked. The question about receiving an athletic scholarship and whether if a student athlete gets injured, that scholarship would still be available to them. In most cases, the answer is yes. In Division 1 and 2, Maritza can speak to Division 2. In Division 1, many institutions will allow and maintain that financial agreement if a student athlete can't participate. That's often baked into the financial aid agreement itself. In some portions of Division 1, they are actually protected. They could have a multi-year agreement, a multi-year financial aid agreement. But in most cases, institutions are committed to student athlete, and injury is not a reason that scholarship would be canceled or not renewed. So Maritza, do you have anything from Division 2's perspective that you'd like to share on that one?
No, same response as you did. I think that I will mention that the only difference in Division 2 is that athletic scholarships are year-to-year agreement in Division 2.
Thank you, Maritza. I'm just scrolling through the questions here. A bunch have jumped in. Oh yeah, please, Louise.
I think I saw a question regarding Division 3 and need blind.
Yes.
And I think the question was, since you two were talking about athletic scholarships, but we have the academic. The question was, does need blind mean that you're not going to receive anything? And that's not the case at all. There are a handful of Division III institutions, I'm not sure of Division II or Division I, that have need blind admission. And what that means, it's a policy that they're going to consider their applicants no matter what their financial situation is. There are some of our Division III institutions that will meet full need. And so we've talked about that FAFSA. Even if you're looking at a school that costs $50,000 and your need is $48,000, that institution will find a variety of ways without an athletic scholarship to meet that full need. And that's both for Canadian as well as if you were coming from the United States. Did at least answer that question, Jen?
Thanks, Louise. You taught me something today. Before you get off your screen, there's another question, and it's guidance to a Canadian student who is planning to attend what I think is probably a Canadian university this fall, but then would like to transfer to a Division III institution next year. How easy or difficult is it to transfer those credits? And from your perspective, would you recommend that, discourage that, or give any guidance to somebody who's exploring that path?
Absolutely. Again, a great question. So one, Maritza mentioned it. We have close to 450 institutions, and their admissions processes are 450 different ways. And so what I would say is, if you are staying home in Canada for that first year, try to create a short list of what schools in the United States you are looking to transfer to. I would reach out to their admissions offices and ask about credits that can be transferred. What level do you need to reach? Is it a certain grade level? Is it a certain course? And the reason I say that is you don't want to go through an entire year of schooling in Canada and have none of those credits transfer. That financially probably would not be the best or the wisest decision. So create that short list of what schools in the United States you're thinking about, reach out to them, have an idea of what classes you might be taking at that Canadian school, and see how many of them transfer. And that's just important to do because, again, you don't want to repeat a course if you don't have to. But I wish I could give you a simple answer that all of those institutions would do it the same way, but it's going to be completely different. So you're going to need to do a little bit of homework beforehand to see what institutions best fit your situation for coming in as a transfer student.
Thanks, Louise. I appreciate that. So I'm going to respond to a question from Brad. Louise, don't go too far away. You that are the only one of us with collegiate coaching experience has another question come in your direction. So Brad asked, what happens with the football revenues? And on the screen that showed the association's overall revenues, what you would know is absent from that slide is the American football collegiate system by and large. The NCAA's championships that Maritza covered include one type of Division I championship. It's called the Football Championship Subdivision, but it doesn't include those institutions who participate in the bowl system, the Football Bowl Championship. And that is managed by an external entity. So for American football, when you start to think about any of those big bowls, the Rose Bowl, the Orange Bowl, really any of the bowls, as well as what we have now since the past couple of years, the semifinal and championship game, none of those are managed by the NCAA, and none of those revenues come into the NCAA. That's managed by an external entity that has contracts with the various Division I conferences that participate in that subdivision. So while the association doesn't necessarily feel the impact if football is not being played the way that it's designed this fall, conferences and institutions will absolutely feel another round of pressure from a financial situation if American football is not played as scheduled. So we are tracking and managing and planning for the return of American football, as Maritza has noted on a few occasions. But football revenue itself doesn't impact the NCAA by and large. Small portion obviously exists in Division 2 and 3 as well, but what you see in that bowl system isn't part of the association. So Louise, one of the questions that was asked is about whether prospects should reach out to coaches in the admissions office, and is it frowned upon to badger coaches for a spot on their team? So if you can put back on your coaching hat and share a little bit about what you would recommend for prospects who are interested in attending a particular institution and participating.
Yeah, Jen, happy to do that. And my coaching days go way back, but as I mentioned, I was an athletic director not too long ago. I think reaching out to coaches and being able to provide information to them, technology has changed in such a great way. You can send an email, you can link to a video of you competing. I would not necessarily hound a coach, but you absolutely should reach out to coaches. As I mentioned, just in the United States, there are over 8 million high school students. They're student athletes, they're club athletes, so there are many that coaches probably don't see. After that, what you want is you want a coach that's going to be honest with you. What is going to be your fit, not only on that team, but at that institution? When I was recruiting, what I always used to say to students and their families is, if you were injured in the first month of being on a new campus, would you still be happy with that campus? From my previous answer, we've already talked about transferring and what credits can be accepted or not accepted. Transferring is hard. It usually ends up extending your time on a campus by a year to a year and a half. That becomes a financial obligation. So when you're looking and you reach out to coaches, make sure that you're asking all the questions beyond that sport, so that if things don't work out either with the coach or you get injured, you know that you're still at the right institution for your academics. And as I mentioned early, also sort of that social component, all the other things that you want to do when you're on a college campus. One, for the great experience, but two, it also starts to build your experiences and your resume for beyond college. So at least in Division 3, absolutely reach out to coaches, but don't hound them. Don't reach out to them every 2 days and say, why haven't I heard from you?
Thanks, Louise. Maritza, I'm curious if you would be willing to share a little bit your perspective as an international student. One of the question that Karen poses is, what is the biggest issue that a Canadian student athlete faces at a U.S. university? And I think probably from your perspective and your experience, when you came to the United States for postgraduate education, you might be able to share that perspective, as well as what you hear from folks at Simon Fraser about how Canadian students fare well or are challenged when they enroll at a U.S. university.
Thanks, Jen. And yeah, I'll mention that I think most of the challenges will be cultural challenges, adapting to a new country, a new way of seeing things. I was fortunate enough that when I came to the U.S. to go to my university, I was part of a very small group that was an international group. It's mostly, so we all came from different backgrounds and different connections. But I will also mention that we were made to feel welcome. We were provided with all of the support that we needed to adjust to a new country, some of us to a new language, actually. So I think culturally there will be things that are done differently, but all institutions have support and resources to assist international students and student athletes. I know that our Ncaa national office is committed to diversity, and international student athletes is a part of those diverse efforts. So we have developed resources for our institutions to assist our international student athletes come to U.S. universities and adjust to the rigors of a different country, of a different learning system. But again, I think other than culturally, our institutions are pretty adept at supporting international student athletes overall.
So if it's okay with Elizabeth, and we're going to do a rapid fire really quickly and try to address 3 more questions before we allow you to get on with the rest of the time together today. The first I'll address is about the sport of figure skating and whether figure skating will be an NCAA sport in the near future. Hard to say. The NCAA does have an emerging sport for women program that enters new sports into the association system, kind of on a path with some benchmarks that need to be reached. I responded to Kelly and Tracy in the chat function with the Emerging Sports for Women website, where you can find information about that. So feel free to search information there. To the best of my knowledge, Maritza and Louise can correct me if I don't have this right, I haven't heard about figure skating becoming an emerging sport for the NCAA. Doesn't mean that it won't in the future, but I haven't heard that on the radar just yet. So let me just address one more quickly about if a Division I student athlete has a scholarship offer but can't cross the border because of the coronavirus. How will that be affected? I think the question is about how the scholarship may be affected or their enrollment. And that's a question you should really ask the institution. Institutions are going to be in the best position to answer that question directly, and I'm certain that they're prepared to provide guidance accordingly to those individuals who are going to be impacted this way. The last one that I'll give to Louise or Maritza or whoever would like to jump in on this one. I've just lost it. Well, I've lost it. So I'll stop there. If anybody would like to give anything else, Louise and Maritza, any closing comments for you before we turn it over to Elizabeth?
Jen, I was just going to add that similar to your previous question, there's a question about curling as an NCAA sport. Again, it is not an NCAA sport at this time. We also have not heard of a request of adding at least women's curling to the Emerging Sports for Women program. And there was another question about women's rugby. Women's rugby is an emerging sport for women. So if you have any more questions about women's rugby, you can see the link that Jen provided. There's also on ncaa.org. If you go to ncaa.org and you go to About Us and then search for a school, you can search schools in all 3 divisions by sports. So there was a question about how to do that. So if you would like to do that, all you have to do is go to ncaa.org and then go hover over About Us and then search for a school. And there's different tools that would allow you to search schools that sponsor different sports.
Thanks, Maritza. I appreciate that direction.
And Jen, the last thing I'll add, I saw the question, if you're trying to figure out how to reach out to a coach, use the website. So I'm going to go back to the individual who really loved John Hopkins. You look up that institution's athletics department and you look to the athletics staff department directory. They're almost listed the exact same way for the entire association. You will find the names and the emails and the phone numbers of all coaches. That is the best way. And then somebody else mentioned that, a coach isn't getting back to them. If you've reached out a couple times and have not heard back from a coach, I hate to say it, what you should do is probably move on to another institution. If they are not willing to reach back out to you to acknowledge that they have received, knowing that they receive hundreds of emails weekly, try a different institution again, but make sure you're looking not just athletically. I can't emphasize it enough. You want that full rounded experience, be it at Division 1, 2, or 3. That's so critical that you have athletics, academics, and sort of, as I've mentioned a couple times, that social component. And finally, Jen, yes, there are many, many recruiting services out there, but I would do a cost analysis in terms of how much do you want to pay somebody to put your name out there, knowing that you can do that yourself, or your coaches could help you. If they have connections with any university coaches, and if they're willing to reach out on your behalf, that's another avenue to take. Thanks, Jen.
Thank you. It was a pleasure to be with all of you today. We appreciate your questions. I'm very sorry we couldn't address all of the questions, whether it's lack of knowledge in particular areas, or those that maybe our exceptional colleague Elizabeth might answer here in the next couple of minutes. But we really do appreciate the time with you all today and wish you all of the best in your collegiate search and collegiate career if it works for you to become part of the NCAA community. So thank you.